and spiritual. So President Zelensky posting on Telegram in the last few minutes saying it's important that Ukraine is heard and not forgotten. President Zelensky expected to go to Keir Starmer's Defence Summit in London tomorrow, so it'll be interesting to see whether he says anything more when there. Plenty more on that story, of course, throughout the day. In the meantime, though, we're going to turn our attention elsewhere, because a festival begins today that celebrates the culture, heritage and future of non-posh Londoners. The Modern Cockney Festival runs for all of March and comes with its own manifesto calling for action to tackle declining British regional identities. And to talk a little bit more about this, I'm joined in the studio by co-founder of the Modern Cockney Festival, Saif Osmani, and also we're going to talk to sociolinguist at the University of Essex, Amanda Cole, who joins us from Colchester. So morning to both of you, lovely to see you. James is here as well. Saif, to you first of all, so this, remind me what it's called, the Modern Cockney Festival. What's it all about and why have you planned it?
Well, Cockney has changed and evolved, and the East End has changed and evolved with the various communities who have come in. We still think that there's prejudice at various levels in our society because of the class structures that determine where people should be and how they should act and behave. And really, the Modern Cockney Festival is here as a celebration of culture, heritage and everything we love about Cockney. So we really want to break through a lot of these stereotypes and these...
So what are you concerned about? What do you think the stereotypes are then around?
Well, I think mainstream media generally kind of shows Cockney and the Cockney language associated with criminality sometimes to lower ends of our society. But actually, Cockney does have some posh sort of beginnings. If you look at a modern-day use of Cockney, there's Mockneys, Poshneys, and there's code-switching Cockneys, which is probably what we are nowadays in the East End, because we use our accents and languages in different ways in a much more dynamic way with the social media as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And Amanda, I want to bring you in here because you will have been studying how language evolves, how accents evolve. I mean, is Cockney under threat, would you say?
So I suppose I wouldn't use the word threat because languages naturally change and evolve over time, and that includes Cockney. But I suppose what I can speak to is the research, including my own, has shown that maybe Cockney isn't one of the predominant accents spoken by young people in South East England. But that has been part of a long process of accent change that's happened in the region. And actually, if we do look more broadly, we can find traits of Cockney have spread very widely. So one of the main places that we now find the Cockney dialect is spoken to some degree is in Essex, and that is part of the movement of people from Essex, from London to Essex. So, for instance, both sets of my grandparents after World War II were moved by local government to council estates in Essex. That was a trajectory that a lot of people followed. So it's not a coincidence that now what many of us think of an Essex accent has a lot of Cockney in it. So I think Cockney is not necessarily under threat, but accents have changed for sure.
It's interesting hearing that, actually, because I'm originally from Essex, and actually, if you see me talking to my friends, my accent definitely changes, I think. So a lot of people in the media may speak slightly differently when on camera and in studios, but actually when I'm amongst friends, my Essexness comes out quite a bit. Does that happen a lot? Do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I live in Newham and I work in Tower Hamlets, so Cockney is still prevalent in all of those areas with all the people I engage with. And you're right, people do switch it, and often it's the glottal sound, which is dropping the T's and so for like ain't it or something like that, so which starts to come out maybe after a certain time in the day.
after a certain visit to a certain establishment.
Yeah, that does happen a lot.
That does happen. And what about Cockney rhyming slang? Because obviously that would seem to be quite prevalent a while ago. Does people still use some of the phrases from Cockney rhyming slang?
Well, I mean, a lot of that extended from the street markets, actually, because the costermonger was really the character that embodied rhyming slang, because they're often calling out the goods that they're selling, the fruit and veg, and from that came this idea that somehow there was a secret code, and maybe there's a certain amount of truth to that. But don't forget, the East End's right on the edge of the city as well, so a lot of people were trying to avoid the city taxes. So this idea that the East End was criminal is actually is neither here nor there. I think the main thing here is that this language has evolved, which has changed and evolved over the years, and it's going to change again as well.
Yeah, and Amanda, Saif was referring to it there, the fact that some people have preconceptions about people depending on how they speak or, you know, what their accent is. Is that something that you have noticed in your studies?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge amount of linguistic evidence to suggest that the way people speak does lead people to make categorizations of them and to make judgments about them. And unfortunately, Cockney is one of them accents, and Essex, where people do make negative stereotypes based on it. It tends to be more urban industrialised areas where the accents are most stigmatised. So, for instance, Liverpool, Birmingham, London, and a lot of that is to do with class. It tends to be areas where more working class people live that the accents are more stigmatised. And that's because accent prejudice really is just this mirroring of societal prejudice. It's really nothing to do with anything inherent about the accent. We're seeing societal views reflected back at us.
Well, yeah, and does that affect how accents change? Do people, we heard about James saying that he perhaps speaks slightly differently with friends that hear, or people adapt when they see different people, or, as you say, we're much more mobile now, aren't we? We don't necessarily live where we grew up. So does that mean that we will lose these very definite, specific accents in different areas?
Yeah, so accents do change. And as you say, we all actually change the way we speak. So I know I've done it here as well. I think I have a lot more of an Essex accent naturally. But generally, what we are seeing across the country, including in the south, is regional dialect levelling. So we are seeing accents kind of levelling out a little bit. So people speaking a little bit more similar to each other. That's not to say the whole country is speaking more similar. People tend to orientate towards a more local regional standard. So we have standard Southern British English, for instance, in the south, general Northern English in the north, standard Scottish English, for example. And that does encompass a loss of regional linguistic features and regional dialect. In a way, that is a natural phenomenon that's happening because we do have a lot more geographic mobility. We are exposed to more different types of language. But I think where it does become a problem is when people are consciously or unconsciously changing their accent because they want to get along. And so they're shifting closer towards a standard way of speaking because the way they speak is stigmatised. And I think that is something that we definitely do need to combat.
Well, it's a really fascinating subject. I could talk about it all day, and I love all the history that goes behind it as well. Saif Osmani, thanks very much for coming in and telling us about it. And thanks to Amanda Cole there in Colchester. Thanks very much indeed. And James, lucky you're here because you can tell us about sport.